So our title today, can regenerative farming exist in capitalist societies? And talk about a big bite to bite off, but we're gonna tackle some of this and see what we come up with.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those it's one of those topics, isn't it, that we don't really like to dive into because it is a little bit bleak. But I'm I'm very much an idealist. I would love to champion. I have this romantic idea of, that if you fight for something, you can, implement change. We can make our food systems better. Regenerative farming, I'm always passionate about. So I think this is going to be a really big topic that we're just like kind of tiny, tiny, tiny diving into.
Yes, and one we can follow up later. But also, just as by way of introduction, for those of you watching on my Substack or the Nourishing Liberty podcast, Helen Freeman is a writer and farmer in the UK. She writes Me, My Pigs, and I. Do I get that right? Yeah. So
Yeah,
find
that's
her
right.
on Substack. Incredible writing about the food system there. Of course, I'm Raw Milk Mama on Substack and the Nourishing Liberty podcast. So that's by way of introduction, Helen, right? Did I capture that pretty well?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And a few weeks ago, we had this exchange on Substack where you asked a question, and I'm going to read from my notes here because it was very well phrased. And you reposted a post from another one, Cattle Culture, another one of our regenerative farmers here in the US. And you said this short post really hits the nail on the head. We talked a lot about regenerative agriculture, but the real focus should be on regenerating, not labels, not certifications, just one question. Is your land getting better? More water held in the soil, more biodiversity, more sunlight captured, more life. It's about regenerating every season, every year. And then, of course, you just talked about this topic getting messy. Of course, I jumped in and I said, well, it's great to talk about the soil and the health of the soil, but are people also getting paid fair value? Which doesn't always mean money. I know this is going to come up a lot in this conversation, but fair value doesn't always mean money. And that really sparked a lot. And it sparked me going on some tangents in my writing, unpublished as of yet. But what are your thoughts, Helen? I mean, let's look at this. If we're looking at it through that lens of that question, can regenerative farming actually exist in a capitalist society? But what is it? Let's start with what is it? What
Yeah.
is
I mean,
regenerative farming?
my my the place that I wrote that comment from was probably literally looking at the definition of regenerative farming. It should be the label that, does what it says on the tin. But we all know with farming that labels don't ever do what they say on the tin. They're complex, and regenerative farming is this, and we're going to touch on it later, I know, is this turning into this buzzword that is great, but not quite, you know, it's not quite got its own definition yet. It's still, evolving. It's getting more traction. It's getting a bit of abuse as well in some areas, I would say. Um, but I feel personally it could be something great. It could be like an organic movement without the certification. Um, but it could also be misused, and labeled as so many things are to make it sound like it's doing good when in fact it's just that somebody's misleading their consumers and advertising that they're doing something very different to what they're actually practicing.
Yes.
And obviously for me, regenerative is it's all about rotation. It's all about regeneration. I mean, naturally, I'm going to look at it from a livestock perspective rather than an arable because I've had animals. And I'm more passionate about it that way. But obviously, arable can be just as much regenerating as livestock can be. But in my personal opinion is that the two should integrate together ultimately to be regenerative. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I wrote down a couple of thoughts on this. So I'm actually going to quote myself on this.
yeah, go for it.
So I say regenerative agriculture is or farming is an umbrella term used to imply that the farming practices are improving or bringing back topsoil. They're using biomimicry processes in production and going beyond merely sustaining the current levels of carbon and water in the soil to regenerating them to past levels. So, in other words, truly regenerative farmers are working to regenerate topsoil, often via compost, and sequestering carbon and restoring ecosystem diversity. What do you think? Pretty good foundation?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's pretty much hitting the nail on the head. I think one of the things that we get lost in sometimes when we're defining these kind of movements is whilst we talk about soil health, but soil health in different ecosystems is so different. And a lot of people, it's not a one size fits all. And sometimes we look at it like that because what you touched on then in the definition is you, you also added in ecosystems, which I think is really important because there are ecosystems like wetlands and agroforestry where maybe you won't look at soil health the same way as you would in an arable field, but it's just as crucial.
Yes. And yeah, I want to add something to, I don't think we've touched on this yet, but I want to add that regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture practices does not equal a regenerative food system.
No.
And you and I are always advocating for that truly regenerative food system. And so if a few farmers are producing meat on a big plot of land that they inherited and or they're making their money off farm and then they're shipping meat thousands of miles in styrofoam cooler boxes with ice, that while it may or may not be true that original that it came from a regenerative farm, that is not part of a regenerative food system. And I want to make sure that we make that distinction early on. So comment on that for a second. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I see where you're going. There's two elements here really. First one is there's regenerative farming, and then the second one is a regenerative food system. Because, like you say, one is almost like half of the cycle, whilst a farm will have its own cycle. A food system has so many other elements that we don't consider.
Yes. Yes. And so let's dig in, if we can, for a second on this idea of regenerative farming versus the economics of business. Because this is huge in the US, and I don't know if it's exactly the same in the UK or what shades of it might be. But regenerative farming right now, it's a marketing tactic, it's a branding tactic. And whether or not there's truth in it actually offers very little to whether or not that version of it can regenerate generation after generation. And I argue it cannot. When we have, and what I see, I'm going to take a big broad perspective here and share that what I'm seeing both on the policy level, on the personal level, on the community level, is that any farm even attempting anything like regenerative practices on the farm is getting money in elsewhere. It's grant funding or it's generational land. We still have farmers on land grants. Like, it's absurd. That means that the King of England or whatever, the governor, gave their family land back in the 16 or 1700s, right? I mean, how ridiculous is that overall? But the point is that it's coming from money being made elsewhere. Then they're able to do these regenerative practices on the farm, rotational grazing, um, arable regenerative practices, whatever it might be. But the money's coming in elsewhere. They're advertising regenerative, but nobody else can apply it.
Yeah. And whilst the UK differs, there are some big similarities into that broad observation you've made. Like if I'm going to start with like regenerative farming as a point of view, is that in the UK, farmers heavily rely on subsidies. Now, I'll use my personal experience. We'd never claimed any subsidies, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't, because it is really hard to survive as a farm in the UK without subsidies. And as I don't know if any of you know, but the current subsidy scheme that we have in the UK, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, is on pause for new applicants. It's been reopened for a small number of applicants who were starting their applications but didn't quite finish it or get it confirmed by the date that they closed the grants. But it's causing a lot of problems for UK farmers. There's a lot of difficulty, and these incentives were labelled and creative with a mind to support transition into something that's more nature friendly. But we also have the abusive side of that, where there were obviously incentives to, and I say abusive because this is my opinion, incentives to take land out of production and use it for total rewilding or solar panels. So in that sense, we're not using it for food production at all.
Right.
But as a regenerative farm, yes, you can make your farming business work, but I haven't come across personally anybody that's done it without subsidy help. That doesn't mean there aren't anybody. There isn't anybody out there, but it is incredibly difficult. And we are all pushed. I mean, Steve Reed very famously said in the UK, at the OR, not the Oxford Real Farming Conference, at the Oxford Farming Conference in January, we farmers need to do more with less. We need to diversify. And that is just, for me, a symbol of what is wrong with, policy and how it doesn't support people to transition to farming that is genuinely better for our own health, our countryside, our rural communities. And that is what regenerative farming should be about. And Liz, you're so right, because it is a marketing plan. I don't know actually where it's come from. I know from personal experience as well that when we started farming, we couldn't afford, or we didn't look into, organic certification is really expensive in this country. I'm sure it's the same for you guys in the States, but it is really expensive. So for a new entrant farmer or a new farm or a farm that's transitioning, it's a lot to suck up, and it's years of work to make it, to get your certification. If your soil health isn't organic, then, and your food system has to be completely organic, everything you source to make your feed with, like everything, it's not accessible for everybody. And farming has so many labels. In our industry that we were in pig farming, labeling is an issue because it doesn't clearly promote welfare standards. And regenerative farming and regenerative agriculture became this, like you say, marketing element that you could add to your business that made people understand that you weren't just about producing a pig for meat. You were actually about conserving your land, countryside stewardship, that you were thinking about your system being inclusive. and, your food miles and your byproducts, and also thinking about the welfare of your animals.
Yes, absolutely. And, Helen, I want to share a couple of stories here because there's just you're making me think of a couple of things that are really important in this and just as pinpoints on the map, right? So in the advocacy work I do, policy is messy right now. So I want to the story is from many years ago, but I was working with a farm and we were meeting with somebody on Capitol Hill, Congress. And the part of the area where she was from, it was recently like lots of development was happening. And we go into this meeting to talk about like a really important thing that's affecting the farm. What can her representative do for her? And we sit down and he said, "Oh, where are you from?" Because it's obviously somewhere in his district. And she tells him, "I'm from blah 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 blah." And he says, "Oh, there's a lot of development happening there. Like it's such a great thing." And she and I look at each other and we go, "You mean destruction?" Because like we can't separate that development, this buzzword in this economy and this capitalist society, actually means we're destroying something. We're destroying farmland. We're destroying a forest. We're destroying nature. We cannot separate those two things. And the focus for the folks, I mean, I'm just going to say it, like there's corruption in this all over the place. There's corruption because what so many are looking for is that path to not just stability, but that path to wealth. Like while some farms are struggling to pay one mortgage, some farms are buying up other farms and buying up companies and becoming the central idea, becoming the one that's influencing how things are going, not to decentralize, but to reconsolidate under their own brand or their own image or their own ideology. And that's not, I'm going to say, just that is not what we need. And to your point about farmers struggling and suffering right now, I'm seeing that all over the place. And there are farms I'm connected to, lifelong farmers or multiple decades, and they're ready to give up because they're not getting enough support from their community. And it does tie back into this branding marketing thing, because when you've got big names, big brands that are advertising all over the country, and then people flock to them because they think regenerative farming, that buzzword, because they think they're supporting something wonderful, and they're rejecting the farmers in their own area, it is doing a huge disservice. And I want to say, like the depression, the struggle, the farmers during the COVID shutdowns, when Americans did not know where their food was going to come from, our farmers, our local, small scale, decentralized farmers stepped up. They fed our communities. And now people have forgotten about them. They're dumped in the ditch again. And that's a cycle I see repeating. I just took a couple of minutes. I'd love your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see that in the UK. I mean, I'll start with the personal experiences that we started our farm in the middle of lockdown, so we didn't ride the waves through that whole period, but we definitely felt the effect coming out, and people cared so much about where their produce was coming from. And that was a wonderful
Hmm.
thing. Farmers markets were busy, people were asking questions, and that was great. We were, I would say, flying, doing more and more farmers markets every weekend, squeezing in as much as we could because it was profitable or more profitable than it had been. Um, but that was probably 22, and then 23 there was this turn, and it started to drop off again. And all of us as a farmers market, we all come together, we're all working with each other. Everybody does swapsies and trying to make support their own other businesses. And we're all going, but why was it quiet? And we're all coming up with excuses. Oh, it's school holidays, and oh, it's this event, and everybody's gone to there, or oh, it's too hot, and or it's raining. But the real answer, I think, is that food was becoming, or they were turning back to convenience, and not just convenience in the way of like our supermarkets, because naturally all the supermarkets were still open during COVID. We just had these ridiculous rules about going into them, but some of the smaller businesses or the mid-sized businesses, I should say, like our online farm shops who do like a nationwide centralization, because why go to a farmer's market when you can get it delivered to your house and you still think you're buying the same product? But what people forget about in that system is in that point, and I'm going to go back to your point earlier with this, or link back to it, is that in that moment, people aren't necessarily thinking about a regenerative food system. They're only thinking about a regenerative farm system. And whilst I don't, condemn that, they're still thinking about where their produce is. It's not, we've talked about this briefly beforehand, and I'm also going to bring this up. There, I'm sure you've seen, but we have a Jeremy Clarkson who is doing fantastic things for the farming industry. Don't get me wrong. Clarkson Farm, I'm sure you guys, some of our followers have seen it. We have this thing in the UK that we call it, or the media call it, the Clarkson's effect. So when his new series airs, there's a surge in support from the British public in buying British, and the supermarkets have recognised it. Other people talk about it. Farmers talk about it. Farmers are also advocating for Jeremy Clarkson. But I think my only hold to pick in that is, whilst he's saying, please support your local farmers, he's showing about, in his latest series, he shows his cooperative of farmers that supply his pub. And, that's really commendable. But what he should be, or what I would like to see him do, in addition to supporting, his own farm shop and his local farmers, is encourage people, rather than traveling hundreds of thousands of miles to stand in a 2.5 queue, to use his farm shop or his pub to buy from their local farmers.
Yes.
Because that is huge. And don't get me wrong, we've done it. We did a nationwide food distribution. But this goes back again to your link, but it's not sustainable for a regenerative food system. We would constantly get people going, but why is the postage so much? And we'd be like, because that's what the postage costs. But I don't pay that with every other farm shop. Well, that's because they're swallowing half the cost. We're a small farm, we can't swallow that cost. We'd have to charge it back to you because that's what it costs. Oh, well, that's ridiculous. People, that's not sustainable.
No.
And that's probably why we didn't push it heavily, because
it
wasn't our proudest moment. But we're all scrabbling together to try and make as much income as we can on farms. So again, that goes back to that comparison of regenerative food systems and regenerative farming systems. And if we look at it in a very black and white way, no, I don't necessarily think that regenerative food systems can work in our capitalist society at its current state.
Yep. I mean, this is sticky, right? Because at the same time, I mean, like I touched on it in what I said earlier, but at the same time that most small farms are literally trying to pay one mortgage, this big branding thing means that some of them are swallowing up the little ones, even though they're branding themselves as regenerative farming. Or let's talk about like the NGOs, right? They're branding themselves in a certain way, but there's still so much corruption and all of that as well. And I think it is really important for the average consumer to recognize this, and where that money goes determines what kind of food system we're building. And that being said, Helen, now this might sound like I'm contradicting myself a little bit, but we'll dig into this a little bit. Not all food needs to be in commerce. Okay, what do I mean by that? For the vast majority of human history, we all knew how to find our own food, how to hunt for our own food, how to fish, how to forage, right? And these are Now, oh gosh, Helen, I don't like to say it, but now these are skills that are in commerce. It was passed down generationally. We could walk out our front doors and know what we're looking at. There's the oak tree that provides us the acorns, and this is how we process them so we can eat them. There's the raspberry bush, and on and on and on. Now, in America, it's said that the average American child cannot recognize even 10 native species of plants or animals in their area. And so when you dig into that, we've got this loss of knowledge, loss of ability to pass this on generationally. We see why food is in commerce, but I'm going to stand on the foundational principle that not all food needs to be in commerce. That being said, we need to pay our small farmers fairly. So that sounds like a contradiction. It's really part of the same messy system that we're in right now, and untangling that messiness so that the average human has access to life-sustaining food in their immediate area. That's a lot to comment on, but please help me dissect this.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many elements to that because when we think about buying locally, we forget sometimes about the seasonal element of it as well. Is, you know, we're so used to having everything at our fingertips that and all year round that we've forgotten that, you know, that's not how we would have lived, generations and generations ago. And, and also the way we share our food, our certainly in the UK, we would have had smaller villages, sharing livestock, so it wouldn't necessarily be one family had a whole pig. It might be one family sharing, a pig between four families. Sorry, four families sharing a pig between them. But also, again, back to that point of, our species of plants, we've come so far that there's so many non-native species in our countries now, non-native animals as well that we didn't have generations ago. And we've lost all skills to preserve food, forage for food, hunt for food. I mean, we have a friend in New Zealand, and her father is a tenant on a farm, a long-standing tenant. And I love hearing stories about her family because in the UK we consider New Zealand as like what the UK was like 40 years ago.
Wow.
And it's kind of she still tells us stories about how her dad and her brothers train all year to go hunting for a few weeks up in the mountains, and they have to camp out while they're there. Whatever they eat out there, they're hunting and they're foraging, and then what they have they bring home, and that fills up their freezer for a year worth of venison. And that tradition for me is so admirable because it's just so rare. Like that was normal life probably without, some of the technology of how we get into the mountains and how we get out and things like that. But that idea of going out, finding your food, looking, foraging what you can while you're out there camping, and then bringing it home to sustain your family for a year is it's just unheard of. I mean, you wouldn't see it in the UK. We see game shooting and things like that, and but they're all phasing out as well because it's become this sporting occasion and not just a way of feeding families. And and yeah, we've completely lost our ability to feed ourselves. Our idea of our ability to feed ourselves nowadays is going and buying it from somewhere, sourcing our food from a like from a shop. Doesn't matter
Well,
whether it's yeah.
yeah, Helen, I wrote an article a few months back called The Great American Famine. And in that article, I drew the parallels between what was going on in communist China right before the Great Chinese Famine and what is happening in America right now. And those parallels are uncanny. And it's everything you just mentioned. Okay, so the cause of it might be in communist China, blame it on communism. In capitalist America, blame it on capitalism. The causes might possibly be different unless you want to just say it's like human apathy, right? But the parallels are there. They're so real. And I want to sit with this for a moment because the best, most educated assessment of the Great Chinese Famine is that it directly killed 44 million Chinese. 44 million. And if we can sit with that for a second, I mean, I know we can't comprehend that kind of number, but it makes other democides pale in comparison. And for those who don't know that word, democide means death of people by their own government. So 44 million, that was about 7% of the Chinese population at the time. And what was going on there was production was becoming centralized. Yes, it was centralized to the communes, but production was centralized. There was no ability to get the food from the places that were producing it to the people who needed it. That broke down. And much of the farmland was turned into, well, at that time, it was turned into trying to produce steel. It didn't work. But that parallel is we've touched on is this push towards renewable energy, solar, turning farmland, turning productive land into energy that we don't need, right? Like turn off our dryers, hang our clothes to dry, just don't have a TV in every room. Don't keep the lights on all the time. There's so much we can do to reduce consumption that we don't need to constantly enable more through these. Don't even get me started on solar. That's a whole big sticky knot as well. But the point is that farmland is getting bought up to turn it into solar, which means that farmland will not be usable again for centuries. It's so toxic to the farmland. So all of these parallels are the same. Plus, we have the whole no-till farming thing, which it's a marketing gimmick, folks. Don't necessarily believe it. It means that farmers might not be tilling as they normally do, but it does mean they're applying some kind of herbicide to kill that crop. So look into that more. There's pros and cons to all of it, but it's not just one size fits all. But all of these parallels, and you and I look at these things that are happening and we're going, holy crap, people, pay attention and start supporting your local regenerative food system. We are dooming ourselves. And I don't want to get nihilistic here or too far into the doom and gloom of it because I'm not into the doom and gloom. I'm what we call an apocalyptimist. Right? And I think you are too. We're saying be very aware of the realities so that we can counter them with different actions.
Yeah. I think I love your term. I think I like to refer to myself as, I guess I call myself an idealist, but I guess it's again an optimist on that scale. Is that yes, I see these things happening and I talk about them all the time, and I worry about how much I'm writing negativity, especially on my Substack, in our food system and our farming system. But I'm not doing it because I'm trying to tear apart a system and be a negative, pessimist and all of this. I'm genuinely doing it because I believe that we can do better. I believe that if we talk about it, we can change. I mean, I read a fantastic article from a writer the other day called Sarah Lanford. It was actually about bottom trawling being discussed as being banned in the UK, and it's only being talked about at the moment. But if it goes through, then great. But it's taken her article is about how much writing and talking about it and conversations about it how many of them have had to happen to see some sort of change. I think what I restacked was that I always believed that books could change the world. And until last week, I had proof. Here was my proof. And, that is essentially why we're doing it is because if we talk about it, if we write about it, if we, make more awareness of it. I've met people who've gone, Helen, I had no, how do I find out if bova's in my milk in the UK? And you go, you know, go and open your milk from the fridge and look at the bottom of the package, because even own brand supermarket milk has bova in it. It just, the labels hide in plain sight. And this lady literally turned around and went, oh my God, you were right. It was in my fridge. I'm disgusted how much I've been drinking it. I'm throwing it away now. Like that, that's the awareness I'm talking about, is our conversations are going to make small changes like that. And those small changes might add up to something bigger. But,
Yeah.
it's a huge movement and it's a huge thing to try and change and overcome. But, should we really all give up and just go, there's no hope? Let's just carry on with, whatever we're dictated to. Let's just give up. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't.
I want to make a quick comment, and then I want to quote something else you wrote, but related to that. There's the personal level, and we're all concerned about the personal level because we're all the center of our own universe. So this drive to find healthy food, to find the most cleanest food we can, that's real and that's there, and that's short term. And what I want to say about that is, yes, it's important. And I have this conversation slash argument battle with many of my colleagues at different times. But this idea that a little bit better is better than terrible. It's the lesser of the evils. So go ahead and buy clean meat from the regenerative farm 3,000 miles away, or even a couple hundred miles away, because that's better for you than the supermarket meat.
Yeah.
And and we have this personal side of it, but I want to say also, I'm going to agree and disagree and contradict myself here, and I know this. So yes, okay, we all need to focus on our own personal health, and that's so temporary. But I also want to say that if you're supporting a local farm, and I've done this before, even if that local farm is not regenerative, if that farm then has 50 customers who are diligently supporting them, buying their products, how much impact could those 50 families make in converting that farm from um, conventional to organic practices? So much influence. And then you're building something local and sustainable there. I'm also, look, I'm looking at bananas in my kitchen right now. So is this always? No, like I think we should still be able to get our bananas and mangoes for special occasions, right? This is not an absolute, it's not dogmatic, but it is about looking at how it's not just about sourcing from one or two regenerative farms for my personal health and well-being in the short term. It's about supporting regenerative food system for my long-term well-being and for the future generations, because I care about what my kids have access to and my grandkids and other people's grandkids. And so, Helen, now I know I just spilled a lot, but here, I'm going to read what you wrote, because one of the things you and I both do also is we might say, hey guys, the tidal wave is coming, get off the beach. But then we also say, what's what's the flip side of that? Like, we're both passionate about the quality of food and the connections and the relationships. And you wrote, local food builds resilience. It keeps supply chains short, money local, and soils healthy. Supporting your local farmer isn't a feel-good slogan. It's a blueprint for a secure future. And that's the gist of it. Like it's literally the blueprint for a secure future, for restoring our ecosystems, for creating local food systems where we have food security near us. So if there's a breakdown, we know where to get our food. Okay, your turn.
And I think I think I'm always going to explain where my thought process was coming from writing that. Because for me, being with my background in farming and supplying meat to a local community, it breaks down into the processes that I've been practicing. So for that, like it really like the supply chain short, money local, soil healthy. It this is how it all links for me. So we reared pigs for meat in a free range environment. We didn't have enough land for ourselves, so we would rent land. But that rental land would change. In fact, we were never in the same field twice. We haven't been. So we're regenerating a field, moving on to the next one, moving on to the next one. And in that period, we're fitting in with an arable rotation at that time or at other times. And some of that can be varies. We've done potatoes, we've done barley, we've done wheat, we've done grassland. Like it's a whole mix. But those fields that my pigs are going into, so potatoes, for example, if you grow potatoes, you can only do so many cycles in so many years. Please don't quote me on what or ask what they are because I'm not a potato farmer. But the benefits for the farmer who owned that land is that the pigs go in and eat what's left in the ground because you can never get all the potatoes out of the ground when you harvest them. So you lose 10% of your crop at least to the previous crop that's in the ground. So we go in, we clear the field out, and they get the benefits of the pig manure in the fields, which are naturally rooted out. Now, the downside to farmers is in that system is that the pigs have this amazing technique to root. And so, ploughing a field after isn't very comfortable. It's a bumpy ride in a tractor. But the reduction in fertilizers and chemicals is minimal. Now, we would then buy those cereals that were grown in the fields, especially if it was obviously wheat and barley, to make pig feed. So our mill miles are reduced. We're not buying from a centralized mill. We're not importing soy from another country to make our pig feed. So our pigs are getting a local feed that we've made ourselves. The farmer we're happy because this is another thing for it. We were getting free grazing whilst we're doing a service to the farmer and not just kind of grazing a beautiful grassland that he's going to have to put right afterwards. He's then getting the benefit of a customer buying his feed, his grains, cereals. Granted, in the UK, you'd rather sell milling wheat than wheat to animal feed, but it's still a guaranteed source of income, and it's direct to the farmer, not through a mill. We're then also buying the straw, which is the byproduct of the cereal. So for us, that's that happy regenerative farming cycle almost. And it is a really lovely inclusive mold. Now, for us, it goes an even step further into a regenerative food cycle. So in that first bit, you've got, A, keeping your supply chain short, and B, keeping money local and improving soil health. So to add on to that, we're then traveling to an abattoir to produce our pork. Now, we were very lucky that our abattoir was only like 10 minutes up the road. So that is probably one of the shortest distances for abattoirs. Unfortunately, in January it closed, and now we have to travel to Wiltshire if we want to get there and slaughtered, which is not ideal. But in that system where we were short food miles, you've got better animal welfare, you've got less fossil fuels because we're not traveling as far, it's not taking up our time as farmers on the farm. So it's much more manageable. We're not having to pay somebody to go in and do half a day's labor while we're off the farm for half a day because we've got to go out to the abattoir and back. And also it means that it's not far for it to be delivered to our local butcher who's processing it locally. So we're supporting a local small abattoir, which we're in short supply of in the UK. If you've read my article about Hampshire's last abattoir, you'll know that abattoirs are literally disappearing at a rate of knots. I hear stories every day of more and more closing.
It's
And
the
closing
same
that supply
here,
chain.
Helen. It's Exactly the same.
Yeah. But then you go, we're using a local butcher, and then we're selling to local markets. So we're selling locally online. I'm doing the deliveries myself, and we're selling at local farmers markets. So when you look at it like that, actually, the biggest element that's not regenerative in that cycle, or our regenerative food cycle, is our packaging, is our, you know, when we introduced nationwide shipping, was the postage and things like that. So they are possible, don't get me wrong, but those systems are expensive. But look how many local businesses they supported. We supported a local farmer for cereals, a local on-site milling company, a local abattoir, a local butcher, and a local farm supplying pork. So that's huge, and all of that is going into the local economy. So for me, I've seen the answer, but it's so, like, this is where I don't want to put people off. It is hard work. It's hard work to sell your product locally. It, people are aware. Consumers want to buy their food from somewhere great. But when they've got, a farm shop down the road that sells them, pork from 3 counties away, or even imported, and they don't know about it because they're using a buzzword as a marketing term, then how do you convert those customers into local buyers? And that is the biggest, biggest difficulty.
I agree with you, and I see that here all the time. And I want to touch on like personal finances on this, not my personal, but like family level finances on this, because one of the things I hear all the time, I'll stop using the word all. One of the things I hear frequently is, oh, I can't afford healthy food. I can't afford organics. I can't afford to buy local. And Helen, it's from the same people who are then, going out and getting a new car a week later. Or it's from the same people like who are dripping in diamonds and designer bags. And I just I, I I can't wrap my mind around this, right? Because I also know that, and in my area, we have this horrible disparity. We have, because I'm so close to DC, there's extreme wealth and there's such extreme poverty. And then there's just this base level of people who are struggling to make ends meet. And it's not just paycheck to paycheck. It's more than that. And so we have it all, but I forgot where I was going with that. Lost my train of thought. Oh, so there's lots of people who are relying on food pantries and food stamps and the whole 9 yards here. So that is real, and I feel that struggle for them because I choose good food over any travel. Right, I choose that for my family, so it's a deliberate choice. I don't. I live in hand me down clothing, right? Because I'm like I'm not spending a penny on that and not eating good food. No, right? I understand how important it is on every level. So then facing these people, and I think I'll share this story with you. There's a farm I'm very close to, and I adore them, and they're lifelong farmers, and they do everything as regenerative as possible. I mean, they go to the nth degree. They sacrifice, they work. I mean, during the summer, 20 hours a day. I mean, they're such hard workers. And I've seen them struggling since the past couple of years. I've seen them struggling so hard because people don't care right now. And they don't want to pay a dollar more per pound for their vegetables or whatever it might be. They don't want to pay what it actually costs to produce a 6-pound bag of flour. And yet these same people come to the farm or the farmer and say, oh, I just got back from Europe and there's such a great food system there. Why can't we have that here? And the farmer says to me, he says, why do they do that? Why do they go over there and talk about how great the food system is, but they won't stay here and create that food system here? And when I when I hear these stories from the farmers, it's so much grief. It's grief. It's sadness. It's like they don't matter. And that's heartbreaking to me because they matter more now than ever. I don't even like that phrase, but they matter so much. They are the foundation. They're the anchor of our communities. They're the anchor of food security. Farmers like you, Helen, right? I'm growing. We like if we had to rely on what I grow, we would starve. But I'm just growing for my household. I'm not feeding anybody else, but the farms are. These farms are, and yet they're not respected. They're not nourished in the ways that they need to be. They're not supported. And that's such a huge grief. It's a heartache. And it's all wrapped up in the bigger picture of the economy and the ways that people are suffering right now and the policies. But tackle that for a minute. Where do we go from here, Helen?
And I think if I'm going to tag on another issue, is that it is incredibly hard. It's incredibly heartbreaking. But we're also not making it in any way accessible to new people who might have the drive to fight those fights. You know, all of us who've been doing it for, years or generations, we all get hit by the depression and the pain and the struggle. And I actually touch on it in my recent article because I was talking about education, and there are events like the Oxford Real Farming Conference and Groundswell that's just happened. And I've discussed it with loads of my friends. We all go to these events, or we've been to these events, and you go, oh, I feel terrible. I did this. And then you come back and you're like, right, I've got complete renewed energy. I'm going to transform this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And you feel that buzz. And we're so reliant on that. New people coming into the industry will bring that buzz because they're new. And I don't want to say, you're coming into an industry that's full of suffering, because I think they know that. I think they see it, but I see it so often where people are like, how it's so it's so difficult to get into farming because we're outpriced of land. Tenancies don't come around very often, and when they do, they go to generational, tenants or people who, you know, have links in high places. And all we want to do is build a better food system and buy local food. And why are we stopping those people? We talk about, we're moaning about people going to Europe and saying the food systems are amazing, let's bring them back. Why can't we build those in another country? But we're also stopping ourselves from letting the next generation learn how to grow food by stopping them into the industry. If we had more people in the industry passionately producing food, or at least passionately learning how to produce food, then there'd be more of us fighting the fight together, essentially.
Well, how do we do that? How do we break into that? Because
I mean, it's a
people
really
aren't interested. There's just barriers and there's
yeah.
stigma and
And
there's
I
the
think,
finances of it.
yeah, I think we all talk about the finances of it, and that is the biggest issue. Um, but we all mortgage houses some way or another. We all, mortgage these ridiculous cars, or like you say, cover ourselves dripping in diamonds. So it's not impossible, but it is ridiculously hard. I mean, I could never imagine, never have dreamed in my life that I could have bought land. And I did. And I'm ever so grateful. But, it's also hard to keep hold of it. And I'm not trying to put anybody off with that at all. But, you know, you're almost facing a bigger challenge, but it is doable. You know, we, we, we do make it. And there are programs out there that I don't think get enough praise or enough, you know, people shouting about them that will or that are trying to help new entrants, but they're so small and so few and far between. You know, we need to amplify those opportunities and those groups, and even more, because those people could be another voice in our system that might will support us, essentially. Um, and, going back to your comments about Europe, we do very much the same in the UK. Whilst, the UK technically is Europe continent, we don't, I mean, from my perspective, I look at Italy, and we've talked about this before, but, I look at Italy and I'm like, I they've banned lab grown meat. Wow,
Yeah.
that's groundbreaking.
Yeah.
They've banned solar panels on productive farmland. Again, groundbreaking. Why is it that they get it and we don't? I mean, we're talking about the UK, and I know we said we wouldn't touch on solar, but it drives me mad a little bit because we're taking thousands of acres of land out of food production for solar panels. And
That's
then
going to come
there's
back to bite us, all of
and
us.
look, but what even drives me more mad is now they're looking, or our government, Ed Miliband, decided he wants to finance a program for geoengineering to block out the sun.
Oh gosh, well, yes. I mean,
Like,
it's absurd when what we need to regenerate our world and our ecosystems and our food systems is to come back to nature, to
yeah, I mean,
understand the relationship to nature, and not to
even
be
if you,
like the sun doesn't matter.
yeah, even if you take out the element of the fact that plants need sunlight,
Yes.
why are you, going to create, 2,000-acre plots of solar panels all up and down the country to then try and block out the sun? Like, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But yeah,
But
I,
be careful, folks, because that, like, a farm that's now turned into solar panels can now be called a regenerative farm. I mean, this is where that terminology gets icky and corrupt, and it's a buzzword. It's not actually helpful to consumers because it doesn't mean what we think it means.
yeah, and and a great example of that was I spoke to a farmer locally, and he was trying to get planning permission for solar for like one or two of his fields, but he's like he does it not because he wants to, because he needs to, because in his opinion, farming is at the bottom of the list when it comes to the money making scheme. He's
Yes.
had to diversify his and especially as well in the UK with the inheritance tax changes for farmers, that a lot of farmers are now looking at each other, looking at their families and going, we've got some big bills to pay very soon, and we're not even, a viable farm business at the moment. So how are we going to do it without selling everything we've got? And it's going to push them towards things like solar panels, but that links back into the fact that the cost of food is is not reflective of what the process of producing it is. And again, it just brings out again that this is such a messy topic. Like, it's so hard not to go off in tangents left, right, and center because it's all linked. Like, yeah,
It is. And what a great wraparound to the beginning of the conversation, because we talked about is regenerative farming realistic in a capitalist society? And it's this ideology, it's this ideological capture, if you will, that keeps us in this lane of commerce. And not all food has to be in commerce, as we've touched on, right? That, hey, the food you're producing is you're eating it. Your family's eating it. You're not buying that in, right? The food I'm producing, we're eating that. The food we can forage. And you and I on this Substack platform, you and I have so many people we're following who are doing just that. They're producing some of their own. They're foraging and they post these amazing photos and their explanations and teaching on it. So these things are accessible. We have to work for them, but they are accessible. And it's a lot of people I know who talk about regenerative farming and talk about the whole system of regenerative farming. I love it. And I also want to look at them and say, hey, but look at it bigger than just the farm level. It is a whole social system level. And it's looking at regenerative farming as one ingredient in that. It's one thread we have to look at and unravel. But a regenerative food system is not the same as regenerative farming. And you and I, we're going to, until the last breath in our bodies, I'm sure we're going to be talking about the regenerative food system and local food systems and food security, because you put it so eloquently, Helen. I'm gonna read a quote from you again. You said, "What's really at stake? When small farms close, we lose wildlife and biodiversity, rural culture and skills, soil health and food security. It's all connected. And when one thread is pulled, the whole system unravels." And that's so true. And so that means that the converse of that is when we make the effort to support a local farm that's already sacrificing, that's already struggling, we are reinvesting into that system, into that whole system. We're reinvesting into our future, into our biodiversity, our ecosystem restoration. And we can really see it that way, into our own health and the air we're breathing.
Yeah, I think, this is it's not farming related, but I'm pretty sure I've seen you share it a couple of times now. A relative example is also when we when we all get a paid subscriber, like, people don't relate to the fact that that paid subscriber is actually paying your food bill. Like, they're actually making an impact in your life. And it's the same when you go and buy from a local farmer. You're not just, you know, adding to, profit lining a corporation, paying off the overheads on a building, paying off, like, you're literally putting food on the table for that farming family, or keeping the lights on in their house, or, helping them build the, boundaries on their farm. Like, you can literally, if you went to that farmer and said, here's 20 pounds for my produce, what are you going to spend it on? He would be able to tell you exactly where it was. It wouldn't filter down into, different different layers at all. It would be, and don't get me wrong, supermarkets, of course, and these other systems that we think of, or other suppliers that we think of, all have those costs too. But they're also, you know, feeding a lot of. I'm trying to think of this really carefully, because there is definitely an agenda that feeds those kind of corporations. We see, ultra processed foods push, and lobbying our government, and there's so much control in that element. And when you're buying something from the supermarket, you are contributing to that.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. When you're buying from a local farmer, you're not. You're literally, like I explained, putting food on their table, or, keeping the lights on in their home, or keeping their animals fed.
Well, I want to make that direct parallel, Helen. And yes, I couldn't agree with you more about, the small writers on Substack. We're working to pay our first mortgage, right? One mortgage. While some of the bigger writers, they're, multiple houses, the nice fancy cars, the luxury exotic travel. So that's one consideration. And when we bring that parallel to farms in America, I'm going to generalize a little bit here and say that there's this um, celebrity worship type mentality. It's a glamour. It's a, oh, I bought a meat box from so and so, right? It's this social status thing. It's symbolism. And okay, you have a choice. You can go and have that, like, oh, I got my meat box from this big brand and it got delivered. Or And what is that supporting, though? It's not supporting fair farm labor, because they're not paying their labor well, a lot of them that I know of. And it's not supporting the regenerative food system, because they're shipping it in freezer boxes, for crying out loud. And what else? It's supporting buying up more plots of land for one centralized big brand. And it's supporting more on-farm buildings that do we just need a few farms to get really big? Isn't that what we're trying to counter? But then when you put that same investment toward a small local farm, you're literally like telling that farmer what you're doing is worthwhile. Keep doing it. You're allowing them to get the hay they need for the winter and keep their own heat on or upgrade their terrible living conditions. And you're telling them like that support does so much to keep them going because as I just shared the farm I know like they're grieving, they're suffering because they're sacrificing everything and people look at them and say your prices are too high.
And I think you also touched on something else there, is that celebrity farmers, and I'm not naming names or anything, but we'll call them agri-influencers as well. They're not necessarily, whilst they might be a regenerative farm, they're not a regenerative food system because not only, like you say, do they want to push the nationwide brand because they're becoming bigger and more popular, but they also have an element that small farmers or small local farms miss out on, which is that influencer element. You know, we're not getting sent free equipment to trial on our farms. We're not getting free clothing or, endorsements for things or even, paid trips to some of these bigger events. We're paying for everything we've got. And whilst you might think of those as just like luxuries, they're they're still very much an integral part of the food system, the system, farming system. You can't be a dairy farmer if you haven't got, overalls and, the equipment that you need, whether it's clothing or equipment. And a lot of these influencers get thousands of pounds of free, you know, like I say, equipment and, clothing, so things like that. Whereas, if you look at your small local farmers, I bet you they're wearing the same wellies that they've been wearing for 10, 20 years. Literally know that my partner will not, he will wear his wellies and he'll glue the holes in them until they're literally, the soles falling off them before he buys a new pair. That's just him. But it's you see it everywhere. And those elements we forget about is that those celebrity farmers that are so successful and that we're also buying from nationwide and I bought this brand and I bought that, but that doesn't make it a sustainable farm. They're relying on their diversification, and it's just not a diversification that's accessible to everybody.
Right. Exactly. And it's also anyway, we could go off on this tangent for a lot, but like the what's inaccessible once you have that big national level branding, marketing, influence, it's what they are offering. Like you were talking about the free shipping, right? No, a small
Yep.
farmer cannot do free shipping because that is directly coming out of their hay budget or heating
Yep.
budget. Like it's just not, and don't ask, right? It's like, don't
Yeah.
ask.
And I think what I was also going very long-windedly going to link in there is that, you know, when you ask a small farm, when you're asking them to subsidize from something, you're not paying the true cost of it. You know, you're
Exactly.
you're you're supporting that mindset that, you know, we don't want to pay for the price of production. We want to pay for the price of, an industrialized food system where it's convenience, it's, commerce, it's everything.
Yep, exactly. Absolutely, which is also full circle back to not all food needs to be in commerce. And so what are the takeaways? Helen, if you were going to just tell people like 2 or 3 takeaways, how do we begin to shift this ideology? If you're already in a regenerative farm ideology, how do we shift to a regenerative food system ideology? What are a few key takeaways that everybody can do simply in daily life?
I think I'm gonna draw a comparison. So at farm front factories, our message is always eat less but better quality meat. And and that comes across with everything. It doesn't have, while we're primarily a charity that's against factory farming, so it's meat driven. We're still, we branched out. We're all about uh, fruit and veg produce and milling grains, and the whole works. But from my personal opinion, is actually I don't agree that we should eat less meat. But that's just my own personal opinion. Um, I think meat's very good for us. I'm not a vegan. I've dabbled in carnivore. I'm a big advocate of it. But it needs to be the best quality meat or better quality meat. And it goes the same with our produce. Like, even if you look at organic, I love organic produce, but I don't agree with the fact that you can still use chemicals.
Right. Right.
And as a consumer, it really is about conscientious buying. And I bang on about this all the time, because when you buy your produce, what that dollar or pound or whatever you're spending, you have to literally think of it as like a vote. When you're spending that money, it's almost like your polling card at a vote station. You are voting for the food system that you want to support. And, you know, if you want to pay cheaply for supermarket produce, then, that's what you're voting to support. And if you want to pay the true cost of food from a local farmer, then pay the true cost. Don't question it. Just know that your farmer. And again, so many farmers are telling their stories out there because they see these agri-influencers doing it. But actually, the answer is that that's the best way for them to sell. That is 100%, because it's the transparency. I talk about supermarkets as like almost faceless buying. You don't know where it's come from, you don't know how your food's made, and you don't care, because
Yes. Yeah.
that's the way it is. So yes, be mindful of regenerative. People need to be aware that there's this ugly element of it not being certified, not having any sort of, adjudication. But there's a lot of good in it as well.
Yeah.
We've talked about these educational,
Hmm.
aspects of things. Groundswell, if you've been in the UK and you haven't been to Groundswell, go. If you've been to Groundswell, tell all the other farmers how amazing it is, because when you leave, you feel great. And it's a regenerative movement. And I think I'm going to go back to a quote that I read after Groundswell Festival, which was actually made by the Prince of Wales visiting the festival, which is that, regenerative farming is not a fringe movement. It's going to be it's here to stay. It's not come and gone. It's not fizzled out. It's here to stay. So we as consumers and farmers need to start shaping it into something that will benefit both our farming systems and our food systems.
You just reminded me, there's a farmer I work with, Mike Kovac, and he says the same thing. He says, uh, regenerative farming, you can join us now or you can join us later. It's the only path forward.
Yeah.
It
And
really and truly is.
so many people I speak to, they're like, "Uh, isn't that ridiculous?" And we get a lot of, people who don't believe it. If you believe in the climate crisis, like livestock is a scapegoat for carbon emissions, and I'm not going down that rabbit hole, I promise.
Right. I know.
But there's a lot of critique that we shouldn't be doing livestock farming at all. But, livestock is an integral part of regenerative. Regenerative is the full cycle. It's integrated, it's messy, it's every step of the way. And I think that's so, you're so right. It's not, it's, if you don't, you don't join us now, join us later, because it's going to evolve, but it's going to take over every step. You know, we're not just talking about a small element of it, like, for example, how it's bred or how it's reared or how it's produced. We're talking about the whole cycle.
The whole system. Yes, exactly. And, Helen, one thing we didn't even touch on in this large conversation about regenerative systems is water. And it's something that's essential. And we can spill that big issue another time because it's so complex. But with regenerative farming, I mean, there still has to be access to water, enough water to keep the system going. And that might be the domino that pushes everything else down because we're using up our aquifers like at an alarming rate. So not to get off on another tangent on that. But what I would say in response to my own question about what are simple actions people can take in their daily lives, one of them, you say, I know you started with your organization saying eat less meat, but more of it. And I would say, I would agree with you. We need meat for our health, especially as we age. We actually need more protein, better quality protein, but we don't have to waste it. And at least in America, the waste problem is huge. And it's on the household level, and it's on the retail level, and it's on the farm level. And so if we can be aware, really aware and cognizant of the waste that occurs and reduce waste, it's something like 40% of the food produced in America is wasted. And that's absurd. And one of the things that I relate back to, Helen, all the time is that the moment somebody becomes a producer, whether they're growing one tomato plant or a whole farm, the moment they become a producer, they value their food more.
And I think that's everything that we've talked about is actually, whilst we kind of go full cycle on ourselves all the time, like, we have to recognize the best thing you can do is value your food, where it comes from, value your farmer, speak to your community, value them, and, value what you're eating.
Yeah, precisely. And that again, when we're talking about food not needing to be in commerce, it does have to be an exchange of value. So I can't come to you and say, oh, Helen, you've got pigs and meat. Give me food. I need food, right? There has to be a equitable exchange of value. But I could come and work a few days on your farm, and that might be something, or provide something else you need. So I would also encourage people, especially if you don't have the ability to produce, or think you don't have the ability to produce your own food right now, but you want access to good, clean, healthy food, find a local farmer and see what kind of value exchange you can work out. Because that's key in all of this, is that we can uh, gradually chip away at all food being in commerce. It doesn't have to be. You can learn it little by little. You can become a producer and at least create a producer mindset in yourself. At least that. So, Helen, we've dug deep. We've cast a wide net, all the cliches, all the sayings, right? So, yeah, any final thoughts?
That I'm sure there's probably going to be a part 2 to this conversation, because, like you say, there's so much. Like, even then, when you were touching on water, like, you're so right. We didn't even touch on waste. Like, we didn't even touch on how, like, our fishing comes into, like, almost farming, and it's food production, and yeah, it's just massive. But yeah, like I was saying earlier, is there's so much power in where you buy your food, for your own health reasons, for your rural communities, for your farmers, like, so much power in it. So conscientious buying and sourcing is so key.
Absolutely. All right. And one more time, Helen, you are Helen Freeman on Substack, Me, My Pigs, and I. I am Liz Reitzig, Raw Milk Mama. You can also find me on nourishingliberty.com. You can actually download a guide to ask your local farmers, to get to know them a little bit better, to help you understand them. So go to the website, download that guide, follow us on Substack. right? Follow us. And
Yeah.
hey, for anybody who can and wants to upgrade, we're both taking paid subscribers, and your support means the world. Anything else, Helen?
I think that's everything for now, Liz.
All right. Thanks to everyone who joined us for today. And of course,
Yeah, thank you so much.
this will be published on both of our stacks later. And a special shout out to Adam for listening. Adam and I do lives quite a bit, and he was here for us. So thanks, Adam. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Perfect.
All right, Helen.
See you
See
soon.
you later.